In the year 1092, two men stood on the ramparts of a castle perched impossibly high in the Persian mountains. One was the personal representative of the Seljuk Emperor, the most powerful ruler in the Islamic world. The other was a veiled figure who claimed to be the incarnation of God on earth. His name was Hassan-i Sabbah, and he had just founded the most feared secret society in history. Hassan pointed to a guard standing on a distant turret. Without a word, the guard threw himself from the tower, plummeting hundreds of feet to his death on the rocks below. The emperor's representative went pale. Hassan smiled beneath his veil. "Would your master's soldiers do that for him?" he asked. The representative had no answer. He had just witnessed something that would haunt the nightmares of kings and emperors for the next 2 centuries: the absolute devotion of the assassins. This is the true story of the Order of Assassins, a secret society so powerful that their name became synonymous with political murder itself. From their impregnable fortress in the mountains of Persia, they struck fear into the hearts of sultans, crusaders, and caliphs alike. They killed with such precision, such audacity, that their victims never felt safe, no matter how many guards surrounded them. And they did it all while following a philosophy so radical that it still echoes through history today. Nothing is true, everything is permitted. The story begins not with murder, but with friendship. In the city of Nishapur in Persia, around 1050 AD, 3 brilliant young students studied together at one of Islam's greatest centres of learning. Their names were Hassan-i Sabbah, Omar Khayyam, who would become one of history's greatest poets and mathematicians, and Nizam al-Mulk, who would rise to become the Grand Vizier of the Seljuk Empire, the second most powerful man in the Islamic world. According to legend, the 3 friends made a pact. Whichever of them achieved greatness first would help the others rise alongside him. It was Nizam al-Mulk who succeeded first, becoming Grand Vizier to the Sultan. He kept his promise. He offered positions of power to both his old friends. Omar Khayyam accepted a position at the Royal Observatory, where he would calculate one of the most accurate calendars ever devised and write poetry that still moves readers 1,000 years later. But Hassan-i Sabbah wanted more than a comfortable position at court. He wanted power. Real power. Hassan was brilliant, charismatic, and hungry. He rose rapidly through the ranks of the Seljuk court, becoming one of Nizam al-Mulk's most trusted advisors. But Hassan had a fatal flaw: ambition without patience. He grew arrogant, began undermining his old friend, plotting to replace him as Grand Vizier. When Nizam al-Mulk discovered the betrayal, Hassan was banished from the court, cast out into the wilderness with nothing but his intelligence and his burning desire for revenge. Most men would have accepted defeat. Hassan-i Sabbah was not most men. Exiled and humiliated, he travelled to Cairo, the seat of the Fatimid Caliphate, where he discovered something that would change everything: the secret doctrines of Ismailism, a radical branch of Shia Islam that believed in hidden knowledge, divine inspiration, and the absolute authority of a living imam who could interpret religious law as he saw fit. Hassan saw immediately what others had missed. This wasn't just theology. This was a blueprint for power. The Ismaili doctrine taught that there were multiple levels of truth, each revealed only to those worthy of understanding it. The masses believed one thing, the initiated knew another, and at the very top, the fully enlightened understood that traditional morality was merely a tool to control the ignorant. For those who truly understood, all things were permitted. Hassan-i Sabbah had found his weapon. He would create an organization where the highest truth was that there was no truth, where the ultimate law was that there was no law, where devoted followers would commit any act, no matter how forbidden, because their master had shown them that paradise awaited those who obeyed without question. Hassan spent years in Cairo, studying the methods of the Ismaili missionaries, learning how they recruited, how they organized, how they created networks of absolute loyalty. He became a master of what modern intelligence agencies would call tradecraft, compartmentalization, cell structures, cutouts, and plausible deniability. Then he returned to Persia with a plan that would terrify the world. In 1090 AD, Hassan-i Sabbah arrived at the gates of Alamut Castle, perched on a rock 2,000 meters above sea level in the Alborz mountains of northern Persia. Alamut was supposedly impregnable. The name itself meant eagle's nest, and like an eagle's nest it seemed impossible to reach. The castle belonged to a local ruler named Mahdi, and Hassan had no army with which to take it. What he had instead was cunning. Hassan spent months infiltrating Mahdi's household, converting servants, guards, and officials one by one to his cause. He established himself as a wandering teacher, a scholar of religion, harmless and humble. All the while, his secret followers multiplied inside the castle walls. When Hassan finally revealed himself and demanded the fortress, Mahdi laughed. A single man demanding a castle? Madness. Hassan smiled and produced a piece of paper. It was a deed of sale, signed by one of the highest officials in the Seljuk government. That official, it turned out, was already one of Hassan's secret converts. The deed stated that Hassan had purchased the castle for 3,000 gold coins, but with a unique condition. Hassan could claim as much land as could be covered by the hide of a single ox. Mahdi agreed, thinking it a trivial amount. But Hassan cut the ox hide into the thinnest possible strips, joined them together, and used the resulting cord to encompass the entire castle of Alamut. When Mahdi protested, Hassan's converts inside the castle revealed themselves. The governor suddenly realized that his guards, his servants, even his closest advisors, had been working for Hassan all along. He fled into the night, accepting the 3,000 gold coins as payment for a castle he no longer controlled. Hassan-i Sabbah had just performed the greatest bloodless coup in history. Now the real work would begin. Hassan immediately began transforming Alamut from a simple fortress into something the world had never seen before, a state built entirely on the principle of assassination as political strategy. He reinforced the walls, constructed storage rooms that could sustain a siege for years, and built terraced gardens that could supply food even if the castle was completely cut off from the outside world. But these physical improvements were nothing compared to what Hassan built in the minds of his followers. The training system Hassan developed was unlike anything that had come before. Young recruits, often orphans or sons of converted families, were brought to Alamut at a young age. They were taught languages, particularly Arabic, Turkish, and the dialects of Christian Europe, so they could pass as natives in any land. They learned customs, manners, and behaviours of different cultures, becoming masters of disguise. They studied religion so deeply that they could pose as devout Muslims, Christians, or Jews as their missions required. And they were trained in the art of murder. But the physical training was secondary to the psychological conditioning. Hassan understood something that modern intelligence agencies would not fully grasp for centuries. The most powerful weapon is not a blade but belief. He needed followers who would kill without hesitation and die without fear. To create such devotion, he crafted one of history's most elaborate psychological manipulations. According to the accounts that have survived, Hassan built secret gardens within Alamut, gardens so beautiful they seemed to be paradise itself. These gardens contained fountains flowing with milk and honey, pavilions covered in gold and precious stones, and young women trained to serve as the houris promised to the faithful in paradise. When a young recruit showed particular promise or devotion, Hassan would drug him with hashish or opium, the stories claim, and have him carried unconscious into these gardens. The recruit would wake in what seemed to be heaven itself. Beautiful attendants would explain that this was indeed paradise, that he had been allowed a brief visit to see what awaited him if he served the old man of the mountain faithfully. For hours or days the recruit would experience every pleasure imaginable. Then he would be drugged again and return to the ordinary world. When he woke in his simple quarters, he was told that he had been blessed with a vision of paradise, a vision that would become permanent if he died in service to the master. Modern historians debate whether these gardens actually existed or were propaganda created by Hassan's enemies to explain the seemingly insane courage of his followers. Recent archaeological work at Alamut has found no definitive evidence of such gardens, though sophisticated water systems and residential quarters have been uncovered. But whether the paradise gardens were real or myth, the psychological result was undeniable. Hassan's followers, known as the Fidai, the devoted ones, would undertake missions that were virtually suicide, and they did so with expressions of joy on their faces. The word assassin itself may come from hashishin, or users of hashish, though many scholars now believe this was a slur created by enemies of the order, not an accurate description. The austere Hassan-i Sabbah was unlikely to have condoned drug use. What he did condone was a level of strategic killing that would echo through history. Hassan's first target was not random. In 1092, just 2 years after taking Alamut, he struck at the man who had betrayed him decades before. His old friend, Nizam al-Mulk, the Grand Vizier of the Seljuk Empire. An assassin disguised as a Sufi mystic approached Nizam al-Mulk as he was being carried in his litter. In a motion so swift that guards barely registered it, the assassin plunged a dagger into the vizier's heart. He made no attempt to escape. He stood there smiling as the guards cut him down, reportedly crying out, "The killing of this devil is the beginning of bliss." Sultan Malik Shah, the Seljuk emperor himself, immediately ordered an assault on Alamut. He assembled a massive army and marched toward the eagle's nest. He never made it. The Sultan died suddenly mysteriously, in circumstances that suggested poison. Hassan-i Sabbah had struck again, and he had killed an emperor. The message was clear. No one was safe, not viziers, not sultans, not in their palaces, not surrounded by guards, not anywhere. Over the next several decades, Hassan perfected the art of strategic assassination. His methods were revolutionary. Unlike common killers who struck from ambush and fled, Hassan's assassins often spent months or years infiltrating the households of their targets. They became trusted servants, loyal guards, even close confidants. An assassin might live for years as a simple groom in a prince's stable, waiting patiently for the order from Alamut that might never come. But when that order arrived, the assassin would strike without hesitation, usually in public, usually with a dagger, and usually making no attempt to escape. This public nature of the killings was deliberate. Hassan wanted everyone to see that his reach was absolute. A ruler might be killed in the middle of a crowded mosque during Friday prayers. A general might die in his own war tent, surrounded by his most trusted officers. A rival religious leader might be struck down while giving a sermon. The message was always the same. Hassan could reach you anywhere, at any time, and the people you trust most might be his instruments. The psychological impact was devastating. Rulers began to wear chainmail under their robes at all times. They stopped trusting their servants, their guards, even their families. Some slept in different rooms each night, never following a pattern. Others employed food tasters, bodyguards, and kept their movements secret. None of it mattered. Hassan's network was too extensive, his followers too patient, and his intelligence too good. One of the most chilling demonstrations of Hassan's power came when a Persian caliph sent him a message demanding that he cease his activities and submit to the caliph's authority. Hassan's response was elegant and terrifying. The caliph woke one morning to find a dagger plunged into the pillow next to his head. Attached to it was a note. "What has been placed beside thy head may be planted in thy heart." The caliph immediately ceased all hostile actions toward the assassins. He had received Hassan's message. I could have killed you, but chose not to. Consider this mercy, and do not test me again. Within Alamut itself, Hassan established a rule of iron. He executed 2 of his own sons, one for breaking the prohibition against alcohol, and another for falsely claiming to have killed an enemy of the order. This was not cruelty, but calculation. Hassan needed his followers to understand that the only law was his law, that family bonds meant nothing compared to devotion to the cause, and that disobedience, even from his own blood, would be met with death. The message was received. For 34 years Hassan ruled the assassins from Alamut, never once leaving the castle after he first entered it in 1090. Archaeological excavations have revealed that Alamut was far more than a fortress. It was a complete self-sustaining community, a city-state in miniature. The recent discovery of a sophisticated water management system shows the engineering brilliance of Hassan's organization. Terracotta pipes called tan-boucher carried water throughout the castle complex. Rock-carved reservoirs collected and stored rainwater, ensuring the fortress could survive years-long sieges. These discoveries, announced just weeks ago as Alamut moves toward UNESCO World Heritage status, prove that Hassan built for permanence. But Hassan also built Alamut as a centre of learning. The castle's library became famous throughout the Islamic world, attracting scholars, scientists, and philosophers. Hassan collected manuscripts on astronomy, mathematics, medicine, and philosophy. The Library of Alamut was said to rival any in the world, containing knowledge from across the known world. This was part of Hassan's genius. He understood that power came not just from the blade, but from knowledge, from understanding the world better than your enemies did. Hassan died in 1124 after ruling for 34 years. In that time, he had transformed a single castle into a network of fortresses across Persia and later into Syria. He had made the word assassin synonymous with fear. He had demonstrated that a small dedicated organization could terrorize empires, and he had done it all without ever compromising his austere principles. Hassan apparently lived simply, spent most of his time in prayer and study, and died convinced that he had served a higher purpose. But Hassan's death did not end the order of assassins. In fact, it was only the beginning. His successors expanded the organization, refined its methods, and spread its terror across the Islamic world and into Crusader territories. And they did it all following Hassan's fundamental principle. Assassination was not murder, but a precise surgical tool of statecraft, a way to eliminate key individuals and change the course of history without the vast slaughter of conventional warfare. The expansion into Syria created a new centre of assassin power under the leadership of a man known as Rashid ad-Din Sinan, the old man of the mountain to the Crusaders. Sinan took command of the Syrian branch of the assassins in 1162 and ruled until his death in 1193. Under Sinan, the assassins achieved their greatest influence and their most spectacular kills. Sinan was, if anything, even more mysterious than Hassan had been. He ruled from the fortress of Masyaf in Syria, a castle that would later be made famous by video games, but was in reality as formidable as any fortress in the region. From Masyaf, Sinan commanded a network of castles throughout the mountains of Syria, creating a state within a state, answerable to no one. It was Sinan who brought the assassins into direct conflict with the Crusaders, and it was during this period that European chronicles began to record their terrified accounts of the Hashishin, the assassins who seemed to fear nothing and could penetrate any security. Marco Polo's later account, though written decades after the events and filled with exaggerations, captured the fear that the assassins inspired. They were, he claimed, a cult of killers who used drugs and promises of paradise to create fearless murderers. The truth was more disturbing than the myth. They were a sophisticated intelligence network that had perfected political murder as an art form. Sinan's first major interaction with the Crusaders came in 1152, when he sent ambassadors to King Baldwin III of Jerusalem. But the true nature of this meeting remains mysterious, like so much about the assassins. Some historians believe Sinan was seeking an alliance against their common enemies, the Sunni Muslims, who controlled Damascus and Aleppo. Others suggest it was intelligence gathering, a way to take the measure of the Crusader kingdoms and identify their leaders for potential targeting. What is certain is that the assassins and Crusaders entered into a strange relationship, one that mixed cooperation, fear, and occasional violence. The assassins killed for the Crusaders when it suited them, and the Crusaders sometimes protected assassin territories in exchange for gold and intelligence. It was a practical arrangement between two groups who recognized each other as professionals in the game of power. The most famous near victim of the assassins was Saladin himself, the legendary Muslim general who would reconquer Jerusalem from the Crusaders. Saladin made the fatal mistake of declaring that all heretics, including the assassins, would be crucified if captured. Sinan took this as a declaration of war. What followed was one of the most extraordinary campaigns of political terror in history. Saladin was laying siege to the assassin fortress of Masyaf in 1176 when the first attack came. Assassins penetrated his camp and reached his tent. They were discovered and killed before they could strike, but the message was clear. Sinan could reach him, even in the middle of his own army. Saladin tightened security. He wore chainmail constantly, slept in a specially constructed wooden tower surrounded by guards, and trusted no one he did not know personally. It didn't matter. A second team of assassins penetrated even these defences. One night, Saladin woke to find several assassins standing over his bed. Once again, they were discovered and killed before they could strike, but only because a loyal guard happened to notice something suspicious. Saladin realized he was facing an enemy unlike any he had encountered before. These were not warriors who fought on battlefields. These were shadows who could materialize anywhere, patient as death itself. Saladin immediately lifted the siege of Masyaf and entered into negotiations with Sinan. The exact terms of their agreement remain unknown, but from that moment forward, Saladin ceased all hostile actions against the assassins. Some chronicles claim Saladin and Sinan became allies. Others suggest Saladin simply recognized that the cost of fighting the assassins was too high. Either way, one of the greatest generals in Islamic history had been defeated not by armies, but by fear. The assassins' most controversial killing came in 1192, when Conrad of Montferrat, king of Jerusalem, was murdered just days before his coronation. Conrad was walking to dinner with the Bishop of Beauvais when two assassins disguised as Christian monks approached him. They fell on him with daggers, stabbing him repeatedly before his guards could react. One assassin was killed immediately. The other took refuge in a church, where he was captured and tortured. Under torture, he claimed to have been sent by Richard the Lionheart, King of England, who supposedly wanted Conrad dead because of a political rivalry. The accusation against Richard has never been proven, and most historians now believe the dying assassin was following standard procedure, creating confusion by implicating someone else. The real killer was probably Sinan, working on behalf of Saladin or pursuing his own political agenda, but the murder created a scandal that would echo through Europe. Was Richard the Lionheart capable of hiring Muslim assassins to kill a Christian king? The question would haunt Richard for the rest of his life. Later, Sinan himself supposedly wrote to Leopold V of Austria, exonerating Richard of the crime, though modern historians believe this letter was probably forged by Richard's own administration. The true power of the assassins lay not in how many people they killed, but in who they killed and how they did it. The assassins did not engage in mass violence. They did not lead armies or sack cities. They identified key individuals whose deaths would change political situations, and they eliminated those individuals with surgical precision. A single assassination could end a war, prevent an alliance, or shift the balance of power across entire regions. This was terrorism in its purest form, violence designed to create psychological impact far beyond the physical act itself. The daily life of an assassin in training would have been grueling and strange. Recent archaeological discoveries at Alamut, including residential quarters and training areas, give us glimpses into this world. Young recruits lived in a structured environment that combined elements of a military academy, a monastery, and a university. They rose before dawn for prayers, spent hours in physical training, studied languages and customs, practiced disguise and infiltration techniques, and received religious instruction in the hidden meanings of the Quran as interpreted by the assassin masters. But perhaps most important was the psychological conditioning. Every aspect of their training reinforced absolute obedience to their superiors and complete dedication to the mission. They were taught that their individual lives meant nothing, that death was simply a doorway to paradise, and that the greatest honour was to die in service to the cause. This was not accomplished through drugs or trickery, but through years of careful indoctrination, creating believers who were genuinely convinced they were serving a divine purpose. The assassins also developed an impressive intelligence network. In every major city in the Islamic world and in Crusader territories, they had informants, sympathizers, and sleeper agents. These networks could be activated when needed to provide information, safe houses, or support for missions. An assassin traveling to kill a target in a distant city would find himself supported by an invisible network of helpers who asked no questions and expected no payment beyond the knowledge they were serving the cause. The weapons of the assassins were remarkably simple. Daggers. Not poison, not elaborate devices, but simple blades. This was partly practical. A dagger could be concealed easily and was difficult to detect, but it was also psychological. The assassins wanted their victims to know they had been killed by a human hand, a dedicated individual who had gotten close enough to strike. Poison would have been easier but less terrifying. The dagger was personal, intimate, and impossible to ignore. The assassin state reached its peak in the late 12th century. From Alamut in Persia and Masyaf in Syria, the order controlled dozens of fortresses, collected tribute from surrounding territories, and wielded influence far beyond their relatively small numbers. Kings and sultans paid them respect, if not tribute. The assassins had achieved something remarkable, a tiny state based entirely on reputation, fear, and the precision of their killings. But empires, no matter how clever, cannot stand forever. The assassins had made enemies of nearly every major power in the region. The Sunni Muslim rulers hated them as heretics. The Crusaders feared them as mysterious and unpredictable. And in the 13th century, a new threat emerged from the east that cared nothing for reputations or fear: the Mongols. The Mongol invasion of the Islamic world was one of history's great catastrophes. Led by Hulagu Khan, grandson of Genghis Khan, the Mongol armies were unstoppable. They had conquered China. They had destroyed the Khwarezmian Empire. They had razed cities to the ground and slaughtered entire populations. And they were coming for the assassins. The assassins made a fatal miscalculation. They attempted to assassinate Hulagu Khan's brother, the great Khan Munka, in Mongolia. The assassination failed, but it signed the death warrant for the entire assassin state. Hulagu Khan made the destruction of the assassins his personal mission. In 1256, he assembled a massive army and marched on Alamut. The Mongol siege of Alamut demonstrated how warfare had evolved beyond the assassin's ability to counter it. The Mongols brought Chinese engineers who had perfected siege warfare to a science. They constructed catapults capable of throwing projectiles nearly 3 kilometers. They built siege towers that could assault walls from multiple directions simultaneously. They systematically cut off all supply routes and surrounded the castle complex so completely that not even a mouse could escape. Most devastating was the Mongols' psychological warfare. They offered terms: surrender immediately and live, resist and die. Every castle that resisted was completely destroyed, every inhabitant massacred. Word spread quickly. The Mongols did not fear the assassin's reputation. They could not be intimidated by threats of future revenge. They came from a culture where loyalty to the Khan was absolute, and where death in service was considered glorious. The assassins had finally met an enemy immune to their greatest weapon: fear. The last Grand Master of the Alamut assassins, Rukn al-Din Kursha, tried to negotiate. He surrendered, hoping to preserve his people's lives. The Mongols accepted his surrender. They stripped the fortresses of their valuables, catalogued the famous library of Alamut, and then systematically destroyed it all. They burned tens of thousands of manuscripts, including texts on astronomy, mathematics, medicine, and philosophy that were unique in the world. They tore down the walls of Alamut stone by stone, and despite their promises of mercy, they executed Rukn al-Din Kursha and massacred most of his followers. By 1258, the Persian branch of the assassins had been annihilated. The Mongols moved on to Baghdad, destroying the Abbasid Caliphate itself in an orgy of violence that killed hundreds of thousands. The medieval Islamic world was forever changed, and the assassins, who had seemed invincible just decades before, were nearly extinct. But history has a way of preserving what seems destroyed. In 1275, just 19 years after the Mongol conquest, archaeological evidence shows that assassin survivors recaptured Alamut. It was a brief resurgence, lasting only until 1282, when the Mongols retook the castle. But it proved that the assassins had not been completely eliminated. Some survived, scattered throughout Persia and Syria. They went underground, maintaining their beliefs in secret, passing down their traditions in whispers. The Syrian branch of the assassins lasted longer, but they too fell eventually. In the 1270s, the Mamluk Sultan Baybars systematically conquered the remaining assassin fortresses in Syria. Masyaf, the legendary castle of the Old Man of the Mountain, fell in 1273. Unlike the Mongols, Baybars did not massacre the inhabitants. He simply absorbed the assassin territories into his empire, ending their political independence. The question remains, why did the assassins fail? They had survived for nearly 2 centuries. They had defeated armies, terrified empires, and established a state that seemed unassailable in its mountain fortresses. What went wrong? The answer is that the assassins were a product of their time, and that time was ending. Their strategy of targeted assassination worked brilliantly in the fragmented political landscape of the medieval Islamic world, where power was personal, where the death of a single ruler could change everything. But the Mongols represented a different kind of power: institutional, systematic, and overwhelming. You could not intimidate the Mongol Empire by killing individuals. There were always more commanders, more soldiers, more waves of attackers. The Mongols were not playing the assassin's game. They were playing a game of absolute conquest, and in that game, the assassin's tricks were useless. The legacy of the assassins survived their political destruction. The Nizari Ismaili community, the religious tradition from which the assassins emerged, continued to exist. They moved eastward, establishing communities in what is now Pakistan, India, and Afghanistan. Today, the Nizari Ismailis number in the millions, led by the Aga Khan, and they bear little resemblance to their infamous medieval predecessors. They are known for their charitable work, their progressive interpretations of Islam, and their contributions to education and healthcare. The transformation from feared assassins to respected philanthropists is one of history's most remarkable rehabilitations. But the darker legacy also endures. The word assassin entered every European language as a term for political murder. The idea that a secret society could operate invisibly within society, turning trusted servants into killers, inspired centuries of conspiracy theories. The assassins became the template for countless fictional secret societies, from the villains in thriller novels to video game franchises like Assassin's Creed, which has introduced millions to a fictionalized version of assassin history. What should we make of the assassins today? Modern historians have worked to separate fact from fiction, to understand them not as drug-crazed cultists, but as a sophisticated political movement that used assassination as a tool of statecraft. They were terrorists, yes, but they were also strategic thinkers who understood that power came not from strength, but from the precise application of violence at critical moments. They were murderers, but they were also builders of a society that valued learning, that maintained sophisticated engineering works, that created communities that lasted for generations. The recent archaeological work at Alamut has revealed a more complex picture than the legend suggested. The water management systems show advanced engineering. The residential quarters reveal a structured community. The fragments of manuscripts prove the library was real and extensive. The tile work discovered in recent years, including pieces depicting scenes from the Persian epic poem Shahnameh, suggests that the assassins maintained connections to Persian cultural traditions, even as they pursued their radical religious and political agenda. Most intriguing is the ongoing search for Hassan-i Sabbah's tomb. According to tradition, Hassan was buried somewhere in Alamut, but the location was kept secret. Recent discoveries of medieval tile work have raised hopes that the tomb might still be found, hidden somewhere in the ruins of the Eagle's Nest. If found, it would be one of the most significant archaeological discoveries in Islamic history, shedding light on a figure who shaped the medieval world but left almost no physical trace. The philosophy Hassan created, captured in the phrase, "Nothing is true, everything is permitted," has resonated through history in ways its creator probably never imagined. It appears in the works of Western philosophers. It inspired 20th century existentialists. It became the motto of fictional assassin orders. But what did Hassan really mean by it? Was it nihilism, the belief that nothing matters? Or was it something more nuanced, the idea that conventional morality was just one interpretation, that those who truly understood could see beyond the rules that bound ordinary people? The truth probably lies somewhere in between. Hassan was creating a system where his followers would obey him absolutely, even when ordered to commit acts that Islam explicitly forbade, like murder. To achieve this, he needed to break down their belief in absolute right and wrong. He needed them to accept that the rules they had been taught were merely conventions, that true wisdom lay in obedience to the master who had seen beyond the veil of ordinary understanding. It was sophisticated, psychological manipulation dressed in philosophical language, but it worked. For 2 centuries, the assassins operated as one of the most effective covert organizations in history. They achieved political objectives that armies could not. They survived against enemies vastly more powerful. They created a legacy that continues to fascinate and terrify nearly 1,000 years later. The final mystery of the assassins is this: were they heroes or villains? By their own lights, they were defenders of the true faith against heretics and usurpers. They saw themselves as an island of enlightenment in a sea of ignorance, preserving true knowledge, while the world around them fell into barbarism and sectarian conflict. Their enemies saw them as murderous cultists who perverted religion to justify murder and created an empire of fear. The truth, as always, is more complicated. The assassins killed hundreds, perhaps thousands, over their 2-century existence. Each killing was an individual tragedy, a life snuffed out for political convenience. But compared to the vast slaughters of medieval warfare, where armies routinely massacred entire cities, The assassins were almost surgical in their violence. They killed individuals to prevent wars that would have killed thousands. Does that make them heroes? Or were they simply terrorists who discovered that small-scale murder could be more effective than large-scale warfare? History offers no easy answers. What it does offer is the story of the assassins themselves. Brilliant, ruthless, devoted, and ultimately doomed. They proved that a small group of committed individuals could change the course of history. They demonstrated that reputation and fear could be as powerful as armies, and they left us with an enduring mystery. The eagle's nest in the Persian mountains, where it all began, still stands in ruins, still keeping its secrets, still haunting our imagination, nearly 1,000 years after Hassan-i Sabbah first climbed to those heights and built his empire of shadows. Today you can visit Alamut if you're willing to make the journey. The castle sits atop its rock in the Alborz Mountains, accessible by a difficult hiking trail that climbs through spectacular mountain scenery. What remains are ruins, broken walls, the outlines of buildings, cisterns that once held water for a besieged community. The famous library is gone, burned by the Mongols. The secret gardens, if they ever existed, have vanished without a trace. Hassan's tomb remains hidden, if it survives at all. But, standing on those ramparts, looking out over the mountains where Hassan once commanded his followers, you can feel the weight of history. This is where it all happened, where the word assassin was born, where political murder became an art form, where a single man with no army and no kingdom proved that ideas and dedication could be more powerful than empires. For 200 years, this remote fortress was the most feared place in the Islamic world. Kings trembled at its name, emperors negotiated with its master, and from these rocks, invisible networks of devoted killers spread across the known world, changing history one blade stroke at a time. The story of the assassins reminds us that power comes in many forms. It can be armies and gold, yes, but it can also be belief, dedication, and the willingness to do what others will not. It can be patience, intelligence, and the strategic application of violence at precisely the right moment. The assassins understood this. They built an empire not on military might, but on reputation, on the certainty that they could reach anyone, anywhere, anytime. And for 2 centuries, that was enough. In the end, they fell not because their strategy failed, but because the world changed. The medieval order of personal rule and fragmented power gave way to larger, more organized empires. The Mongols and Mamluks built states that could absorb the loss of individual leaders without collapsing. The game changed, and the assassins could not adapt quickly enough. But for their moment in history, they were masters of their craft, and their legacy continues to shape how we think about power, violence, and the shadows where politics and murder meet. From Alamut to Masyaf, from Hassan-i Sabbah to Rashid ad-Din Sinan, from the dagger in Nizam al-Mulk's heart to the fall before the Mongol catapults, the story of the assassins is the story of an idea, that the right death at the right time can change everything. It is a dark idea, a dangerous idea, but it is also an undeniably powerful one. And it is an idea that despite the passage of centuries, despite the destruction of their fortresses and the scattering of their order, continues to live. Because the name assassin still carries weight. The eagle's nest still stands. And the memory of the old man of the mountain who could make kings tremble with a word and guards throw themselves from towers with a glance still haunts the places where power is wielded in secret and death comes unexpectedly to those who thought themselves safe. The methods by which the assassins operated deserve deeper examination because they pioneered techniques that intelligence agencies would not fully understand for centuries. Consider the case of the assassination of Jana ad-Dawla, the Emir of Homs, in 1103. This killing demonstrates the patience and sophistication of assassin operations at their finest. Jana ad-Dawla was a powerful regional ruler, constantly surrounded by guards, suspicious by nature, trusting no one outside his immediate family. To kill such a man required more than courage. It required an assassin who could spend years becoming part of the target's life, building trust so deep that suspicion would never arise. The assassin assigned to this mission was a young man who entered Jana ad-Dawla's service as a groom, caring for the emir's prized horses. For 3 years, this assassin performed his duties faithfully. He rose early to feed the horses. He groomed them meticulously. He accompanied the emir on hunting trips, always attentive, always reliable, never giving the slightest hint of his true purpose. He became a familiar face, someone the guards ignored because he was just part of the household, as unremarkable as the furniture. And all the while, he waited for the order from Alamut that would activate him. When the order finally came, the assassination was almost anticlimactic. The emir was mounting his horse one morning, preparing for a ride. The groom helped him into the saddle, as he had done hundreds of times before. But this time, as he steadied the horse, he drew a concealed dagger and struck upward into the emir's chest, piercing his heart before anyone realized what was happening. The assassin made no attempt to flee. He stood calmly as the guards killed him, reportedly smiling as he died. This pattern repeated across the medieval Islamic world. Assassins would infiltrate households as servants, guards, even family members through marriage. They would wait not for months but for years, living double lives so completely that even they might have questioned which life was real. And when the order came, they would strike without hesitation, knowing that death was certain, but accepting it as the price of paradise. The psychological profile of these assassins fascinates modern scholars. How do you create someone willing to give up years of their life, to live in deep cover with no support or acknowledgement, knowing that their mission will end in their own death? The answer lies in the sophistication of Hassan-i Sabbah's recruitment and training methods that combined religious indoctrination with practical psychology in ways that were centuries ahead of their time. Hassan understood something fundamental about human psychology. People need purpose. The young men who came to Alamut were often from marginal families, sons without inheritance, orphans without prospects, true believers seeking meaning in a chaotic world. Hassan gave them purpose. He told them they were chosen, special, destined for greatness. He gave them skills that made them valuable. He gave them a community that valued them. And most importantly, he gave them a narrative in which their lives and deaths mattered absolutely. The religious component was critical, but not in the way popular legends suggest. Hassan did not need to drug his recruits or trick them into believing in paradise. The promise of paradise after death was central to Islamic belief, accepted by virtually everyone in the medieval Islamic world. What Hassan did was make that promise immediate and personal. He taught his followers that ordinary Muslims might hope for paradise, but the fidai, the devoted ones, were guaranteed it. Their deaths in service to the cause were not suicide, which Islam strictly forbids, but martyrdom, which Islam promises will be rewarded with the highest places in heaven. This distinction was crucial. The assassins did not see themselves as throwing their lives away. They saw themselves as trading a few years of earthly existence for an eternity of bliss. To them, it was the most logical transaction imaginable. Why cling to this brief, difficult life when paradise awaited? Why fear death when death was the doorway to everything you desired? This mindset, combined with years of training and indoctrination, created warriors who were genuinely fearless, not because they were drugged or tricked, but because they had been convinced that death was preferable to life. The training these assassins received was comprehensive and sophisticated. Physical training was intense, but not the primary focus. An assassin needed to be fit, certainly, capable of moving silently, of climbing walls, of enduring hardship. But more important was the mental training. Assassins learned to control their emotions, to show nothing on their faces, regardless of what they felt inside. They learned the customs and behaviors of different cultures and social classes, so they could pass as servants, merchants, soldiers, or even nobles as their missions required. Language training was particularly emphasized. An assassin might spend years learning not just Arabic or Persian, but the specific dialect spoken in the target's region, along with local customs, slang, and cultural references that would make their cover identity believable. They studied religious texts, not just of Islam, but of Christianity and other faiths, so they could pose as devout believers of whatever religion their cover required. They learned codes and secret methods of communication, ways to receive orders and send reports without arousing suspicion. Perhaps most importantly, they learned patience. In modern intelligence terminology, they were trained in deep cover operations, a skill that requires extraordinary psychological resilience. To live for years as someone else, to suppress your true identity and beliefs, to never let your guard down, even for a moment, requires a kind of mental discipline that few people possess. The assassins developed training methods that cultivated this discipline, teaching their operatives to think of their cover identities not as disguises, but as real alternative selves that they inhabited completely. The network that supported these operations was equally sophisticated. In every major city, the assassins maintained safe houses, weapons caches, and local contacts who could provide intelligence, supplies, or assistance. These networks were compartmentalized, meaning that members of one cell did not know about others, protecting the overall organization if any individual was captured and tortured. This principle of compartmentalization, which modern intelligence agencies consider fundamental to covert operations, was practiced by the assassins as a matter of course. Communication between Alamut and field operatives was maintained through a system of couriers and coded messages. Orders were often conveyed through seemingly innocent correspondence, with the true meaning hidden in agreed-upon codes. An apparently harmless letter about trading goods might actually contain instructions for an assassination. A religious text copied and sent as a gift might have certain words marked in subtle ways that spelled out a target's name and location. These methods ensured that even if messengers were intercepted, the true content of the communication would remain hidden. The legend of Sinan, the old man of the mountain who ruled the Syrian assassins, deserves particular attention because he represents the order at its height of power and sophistication. Sinan's rule from 1162 to 1193 coincided with the Crusades' most critical period, when Christians and Muslims fought over control of the Holy Land. In this chaotic environment, Sinan built the Syrian assassin state into a power that both sides courted and feared. Sinan's political acumen was extraordinary. He understood that the assassin's real power came not from killing people, but from the threat of killing them. A target who knew he might be assassinated at any moment was often more useful alive than dead, because his fear made him controllable. Sinan used this principle brilliantly, entering into complex negotiations with Crusader and Muslim leaders alike, promising protection from assassination in exchange for political concessions, tribute, or military cooperation. One remarkable example of Sinan's methods involved Count Henry of Champagne, a powerful Crusader lord who ruled the Kingdom of Jerusalem. In 1194, shortly after Sinan's death, Henry was invited to visit Masyaf by Sinan's successor. The visit was designed to demonstrate the absolute obedience Sinan had cultivated in his followers. As Henry walked along the castle walls, his host casually remarked that the assassin's loyalty was absolute. To prove it, he pointed to guards stationed at various points on the walls and indicated that these men would throw themselves to their deaths on his command. Henry, probably thinking this was mere boasting, said he would like to see proof. The assassin leader gave a subtle signal. Without hesitation, 2 guards threw themselves from the walls, falling hundreds of feet to their deaths on the rocks below. Henry was so shocked that he begged for no further demonstrations. He had just witnessed something that violated every assumption about human nature. Men who would die on command, without being forced, without being drugged, simply because their leader ordered it. The psychological impact was devastating. Henry left Masyaf convinced that the assassins were the most dangerous people alive. This incident, recorded in Crusader chronicles, demonstrates both the power and the horror of Hassan's creation. He had built an organization where human life, even one's own life, meant nothing compared to obedience. This was not achieved through cruelty or force, but through conviction. Those guards genuinely believed that by throwing themselves from the walls, they were earning paradise. They died not in despair, but in joy, convinced they were performing a holy act. From a modern perspective, this seems like the ultimate cult behavior, but we must remember that medieval people, Christians and Muslims alike, believed absolutely in the reality of heaven and hell. The assassins simply took that belief and weaponized it. The relationship between the assassins and the crusaders was complex and often contradictory. At times they were enemies, with assassins killing crusader leaders and crusaders attacking assassin fortresses. At other times, they were allies, cooperating against common foes. The assassins sold their services to various crusader factions, providing intelligence and sometimes carrying out assassinations of Muslim leaders who threatened the crusader states. In return, the crusaders sometimes protected assassin territories or paid tribute to avoid being targeted themselves. This pragmatic flexibility was another mark of assassin sophistication. Unlike the crusaders, who were often driven by religious zeal to oppose all Muslims, or the Muslim leaders, who saw the crusaders as infidels who must be expelled, the assassins operated according to practical political calculations. They would work with anyone if it advanced their interests, and they would kill anyone, Muslim or Christian, if the political situation demanded it. This flexibility made them valuable allies and terrifying enemies. One of the most mysterious aspects of assassin operations was their intelligence gathering. How did they know where their targets would be at any given moment? How did they identify which guards could be bribed and which had to be infiltrated? How did they learn the routines, habits, and weaknesses of men who lived in fortified palaces surrounded by security? The answer lies in an intelligence network that was arguably more effective than any other in the medieval world. The assassins maintained informants in every major city. These were not secret agents, but ordinary people, merchants who travelled widely and observed everything, scholars who moved in elite circles, servants in important households who listened at doors. These informants reported regularly on political developments, the movements of important figures, changes in security arrangements, and opportunities for infiltration. This information flowed back to Alamut and Masyaf, where it was analysed and used to plan operations. Consider what this meant in practical terms. If a sultan began planning military action against the assassins, they would know about it before the sultan's own generals did, because a scribe in the palace who copied the orders was secretly loyal to the assassins. If a general was vulnerable to infiltration, they would know which of his servants could be bought or which guards were secretly sympathetic to their cause. If a target changed his routine or increased his security, they would adjust their plans accordingly. This constant flow of intelligence gave the assassins an enormous advantage, allowing them to strike when and where their targets were most vulnerable. The code of the assassins was strict and comprehensive. They were forbidden to kill innocents, a rule Hassan enforced ruthlessly. This was not mercy but strategy. The assassins understood that their power depended on their reputation for precision. If they killed randomly, they would be just another gang of bandits. But by killing only specific targets, they maintained their image as an unstoppable but controllable force. A ruler might think, if I cooperate with them, if I don't threaten them, they will leave me alone. This made the assassins more effective than if they had engaged in terrorism in the modern sense of indiscriminate violence. They were also forbidden to steal, to abuse intoxicants, or to engage in any behavior that might compromise their mission or their cover. Discipline was absolute. An assassin who broke these rules faced execution, even if his mission had been successful. Hassan's execution of his own sons for violating assassin law was not an aberration, but an example of the standard to which all members were held. The message was clear. The cause was everything, individuals were nothing, and the rules applied to everyone equally. The internal structure of the assassin organization was hierarchical and based on the Ismaili principle of progressive revelation. At the lowest level were the novices, young recruits who knew little beyond basic Ismaili theology and their immediate duties. Above them were the fidai, the devoted ones, trained assassins who understood more about the organization's true nature, but still believed in the literal promise of paradise. Above them were the Rafiq, companions, who managed operations and supervised the fidai. At the highest levels were the dais, propagandists who understood the deepest secrets of Ismaili theology, including its more esoteric and potentially heretical aspects. And at the very top stood the Grand Master, Hassan-i Sabbah, and his successors, who supposedly understood the ultimate truth, that all religious law was merely a tool for controlling the masses, that paradise and hell were metaphors rather than literal places, and that the enlightened were free to act as they saw fit, because they understood that conventional morality was an illusion. Whether Hassan actually believed this, or whether it was propaganda created by his enemies, remains debated by historians. But the structure itself was real and effective, creating an organization where each level knew only what they needed to know, and where the full truth was reserved for a tiny elite. The fall of the assassins came not because their methods failed, but because they faced an enemy that their methods could not affect. The Mongol invasions of the 13th century destroyed not just the assassins, but much of the medieval Islamic world. The Mongols were different from any enemy the assassins had faced before. They were not regional rulers whose deaths would throw their kingdoms into chaos. They were a vast imperial machine where individual leaders mattered little. Kill one Mongol commander and another would immediately take his place. Kill a Khan and his sons would continue the conquest in his name. Moreover, the Mongols were not impressed by reputation or fear. They had conquered China, the most populous and advanced civilization in the world. They had destroyed the Khwarezmian Empire, which had been one of the most powerful states in the Islamic world. They saw the assassins not as mysterious and fearsome, but as just another obstacle to be removed. When the assassins attempted to assassinate Munka Khan, the Mongol emperor, they sealed their fate. The assassination failed, but even if it had succeeded, the result would have been the same. Total war until the assassins were exterminated. Hulagu Khan's campaign against the assassins was methodical and ruthless. He began by issuing an ultimatum: surrender immediately and be allowed to live as subjects of the Mongol Empire, or resist and be annihilated. Some assassin castles surrendered without a fight. Their inhabitants were allowed to live, though they were effectively enslaved and their fortresses dismantled. Other castles resisted, and the Mongols made examples of them. After one particularly stubborn castle fell, Hulagu ordered every inhabitant executed and their bodies displayed as a warning. The siege of Alamut itself lasted several months. The Mongol army surrounded the castle completely, cutting off all supply routes. They brought their siege engines within range and began a systematic bombardment. The defenders fought bravely, using their own catapults and crossbows to inflict casualties on the attackers. But the outcome was never in doubt. The Mongols had unlimited manpower, advanced siege technology that included gunpowder weapons brought from China, and absolute determination to finish the job. When Rukn al-Din Kursha, the last Grand Master of Alamut, finally negotiated a surrender, he believed he was saving his people's lives. The Mongols accepted his surrender and invited him to travel to Mongolia to meet the Great Khan and presumably work out terms for the assassins to exist as Mongol subjects. Rukn al-Din agreed and began the long journey eastward. He never reached Mongolia. Along the way, the Mongol escort received orders to execute him. His body was left by the roadside like a common criminal. Meanwhile, back at Alamut, the Mongols, who had promised mercy, turned on the inhabitants and slaughtered them. The destruction of the Alamut library was one of history's great cultural catastrophes. The Mongols catalogued some of the texts before burning them, and these records hint at what was lost. There were astronomical treatises that may have contained observations more accurate than anything available in Europe at the time. There were mathematical works, medical texts, philosophical treatises, and historical documents that would have given us first-hand accounts of assassin operations and beliefs. All of it went up in flames. What we know about the assassins comes primarily from their enemies' accounts, which are inevitably biased and often sensationalized. The question of why some assassins survived the Mongol genocide remains partially answered. Clearly, some members of the order were not at Alamut or other fortresses when the Mongols struck. Some were deep cover operatives in distant cities. Some were members of sympathetic communities who hid their assassin connections. And some simply fled into the mountains and survived through sheer determination. These survivors kept the assassin traditions alive, at least in limited form, as evidenced by the recapture of Alamut in 1275. That brief reconquest of Alamut is one of history's great might-have-beens. For 7 years, from 1275 to 1282, assassin survivors held the Eagle's Nest once again. We know almost nothing about this period because no chronicles from the time discuss it in detail, but the archaeological evidence is clear. Someone was living in and maintaining Alamut during those years. Were they trying to rebuild the organization? Were they simply refugees seeking shelter in the ruins of their former glory? We may never know. When the Mongols retook the castle in 1282, they destroyed it so thoroughly that it would never be inhabited again. The Syrian assassins lasted longer than their Persian cousins, but they too eventually fell. Baybars, the Mamluk Sultan, was one of the most formidable rulers in Islamic history. He had risen from slavery to become sultan, had defeated the Mongols at the Battle of Ain Jalut, and had reclaimed much of the territory the crusaders had conquered. He saw the assassins not as mysterious and fearsome, but as a useful resource that should be controlled. His campaign against the assassin fortresses in Syria was not motivated by hatred or fear, but by practical politics. He wanted their castles for strategic purposes and their fighters for his army. Baybars offered the Syrian assassins terms similar to what the Mongols had offered, but with one crucial difference. He kept his promises. Assassin fighters who surrendered were incorporated into Mamluk armies. Some rose to positions of command. The assassin territories were absorbed into the Mamluk state, but the people were allowed to live. This relatively merciful treatment may have been because Baybars understood the value of assassin skills and did not want to waste them, or it may have been because he, unlike the Mongols, was Muslim and saw the Ismailis as heretics rather than as foreign enemies to be exterminated. Whatever his reasoning, his conquest ended assassin independence without ending the Ismaili community. The transformation of the Nizari Ismailis from assassins to modern philanthropists is one of history's most remarkable redemption stories. After the fall of their fortresses, the Ismailis survived in scattered communities, maintaining their religious identity but abandoning the practice of assassination. Over centuries they moved eastward, establishing strong communities in what is now Pakistan and India. In the 19th century, the British colonial authorities in India recognized the Aga Khan, the hereditary leader of the Nizari Ismailis, as a legitimate religious authority. The current Aga Khan, the 49th hereditary Imam of the Nizari Ismailis, leads a community of 15 million people worldwide. The Aga Khan Development Network operates schools, hospitals, and development projects in some of the poorest regions of Asia and Africa. The transformation from the terror of medieval princes to respected builders of schools and hospitals took centuries, but it demonstrates that even the darkest legacies can be overcome. Yet the fascination with the assassins, as they were in their dark glory, persists. The romantic image of the secret mountain fortress, the devoted warriors, the mysterious old man of the mountain who could command men to their deaths with a word, all of this captures the imagination in ways that stories of modern philanthropy do not. This fascination reached its peak with the Assassin's Creed video game franchise, which has introduced millions of people to a fictionalized version of assassin history. The recent game Assassin's Creed Mirage, released in 2023, featured Alamut Castle prominently and drove renewed interest in the real history. This renewed interest has had real-world effects. Tourism to Alamut has increased dramatically. The castle's nomination for UNESCO World Heritage status has brought international attention and funding for archaeological work. The recent discoveries of the sophisticated water management system and other artifacts have given us new insights into how the assassins actually lived and worked. Every new discovery brings us closer to understanding the reality behind the legend. But perhaps the greatest legacy of the assassins is the questions they force us to confront about power, violence, and belief. They proved that a small group of committed individuals could terrorize empires. They demonstrated that strategic violence could be more effective than massive armies. They showed that belief could be a weapon more powerful than steel. And they left us wondering, if their methods were so effective, why did they ultimately fail? Was it because they were ahead of their time, pioneering techniques that would not be fully understood and utilized until modern intelligence agencies developed them? Or was it because their strategy, no matter how clever, could not withstand the brute force of the Mongol invasions? The answer is probably both. The assassins were brilliant tacticians who understood asymmetric warfare centuries before that term was invented. They proved that intelligence, patience, and precision could defeat conventional military power, but they also demonstrated the limits of such strategies. When faced with an enemy willing to wage total war, when facing extinction rather than mere defeat, clever tactics were not enough. The Mongols did not play by the rules of medieval warfare. They did not seek to control or intimidate the assassins, but to eradicate them. And against such an enemy, the assassins' greatest weapons proved useless. Today, standing among the ruins of Alamut, you can still feel the weight of that history. The castle has been quiet for over 7 centuries, but its ghosts linger. In these stones, Hassan-i Sabbah built his empire of shadows. From these walls, devoted warriors departed on missions from which they knew they would never return. In these rooms, scholars studied texts that were lost to history when the Mongols burned the library. This is where the word assassin was born, where political murder became an art form, where one man proved that with the right ideas and the right methods, you could make the world tremble without commanding a single army. That is the legacy of the assassins. That is the story that began in friendship, turned to betrayal, and ended in empire. That is the truth behind the legend of the most feared secret society in history. A truth more complex and more fascinating than any legend could ever be.